30 kilometers from the Finnish border, 750 kilometers from Moscow, and just 220 kilometers from Helsinki, lies the town of Vyborg. With a population which fluctuates around 80,000 people, Vyborg is not a big place. But its precarious position between the Nordic world and Russia has gifted it a long, fascinating story to tell. It was known as Viipuri back when it was the second largest city in Finland, and while it is just a village in Russia, it may have been a huge loss to the Finns. Now let's get back to the very beginning and discover the past which shaped this fascinating border town. The region was initially inhabited by Karelians, a Baltic Finnic ethnic group who are indigenous to the historical region of Karelia, which is today split between Finland and Russia. The first written mention of Karelia and Karelians occurs in several old Scandinavian sagas, which means that Karelians were known to the Vikings as early as the 7th century. Today in Russia, Karelians mostly live in the Republic of Karelia and in other adjacent northwestern parts of the country. They traditionally speak the Karelian language and are Eastern Orthodox Christians. In Finland, Finnish Karelians traditionally live in the region of Savonia and northern and southern Karelia, as Finland had to cede parts of Karelia to the Soviet Union in World War II. Evacuated Finnish Karelians settled elsewhere in Finland. Since Karelian was not recognized as its own language by the Finnish government until recently, most Karelians had no choice but to learn Finnish and now speak mostly a Finnish Karelian dialect. So going back to the 12th century, these inhabitants gradually came under the domination of Novgorod and Sweden. The Vyborg Castle was founded during the Third Swedish Crusade in 1293 by Mark Torkel Knutsson. According to old Swedish chronicles, the reasoning behind the Swedish incursion was to stop pagans from entering Christian lands. Karelians were said to have destructively entered Sweden in 1257, which led Valdemar, King of Sweden, to request Pope Alexander IV to declare a crusade against them, which he agreed. As a result, Vyborg Castle was the first center for the spread of Christianity in Karelian lands. These lands were then fought over for decades between Sweden and the Novgorod Republic and Russia thereafter. As a result of the Treaty of Göteborg in 1323, Vyborg was finally recognized as a part of Sweden. It was the first agreement between Sweden and the Novgorod Republic, which established a tangible border between the two. Vyborg withstood a siege during the Russo-Swedish Wars of 1496-1497. The war was caused by an alliance between Denmark and Muscovite Russia. The sources are thin on this topic, but apparently Muscovite forces were repelled after a massive explosion occurred in the town. Olaus Magnus included the Vyborg blast in his 1536 Carta Marina, so something truly impressive must have happened. Over the next few centuries, Sweden turned into an empire with one of the biggest and best trained militaries in Europe, bolstered by a strategic alliance with France. In 1658, Sweden reached the peak of its power and size after the Second Northern War, where it fought against a number of European powers and won. However, the tide turned against Sweden when a European alliance, mostly led by Peter the Great of Russia, was able to take him on. The Battle of Poltava in 1709 was the pivotal moment which changed Sweden's fortune and put an end to the status of the Swedish Empire as a great European power, and marked the beginning of the Russian supremacy in Northern Europe. And soon after, in spring of 1710, the Russians, in their counterattack, managed to take Vyborg from the Swedes after besieging it with 13,000 soldiers and Peter the Great's navy composed of some 250 ships. In his letter announcing the capture of Vyborg, Peter the Great wrote that from now on, the final security of St. Petersburg has been achieved, becoming a firm cushion to the new capital, and that by capturing Vyborg, several important strategic goals were achieved. The Russian Empire now had vastly improved access to the Baltic Sea, from which they could launch further attacks against Finland, and a powerful fort that would defend the new capital of St. Petersburg was captured. The 1721 Treaty of Nystad, which concluded the war with Sweden, finalized the transfer of the town and a part of Old Finland to Russia. One thing you probably didn't expect was that one of the largest naval battles in history occurred here, the Battle of Wyborg Bay, again fought between Sweden and Russia. It occurred because King Gustav III of Sweden believed that a short war would strengthen his rule in the country. The Swedish plan was to land its forces as close as possible to St. Petersburg to mount an attack, but this plan failed on multiple occasions. And during one of these attempts, the Swedish fleet, composed of 21 ships of the line, 13 frigates, various smaller ships, and 16,000 men, anchored into Vyborg Bay. And then the Russian Baltic fleet blockaded the only two navigable channels in and out. This blockade consisted of a primary force of 50 ships with 2,718 guns and 21,000 men, and a secondary force of 20 galleys, 8 frigates, and other smaller ships. The Swedish suffered heavy losses, losing 6 ships of the line and 4 frigates, but in the end managed to escape. This battle ranks amongst the world's largest historical naval battles, and also amongst the most influential in terms of development of military strategy. Sweden kept on losing to Russia, especially during the Finnish War of 1808, when Russia managed to take over all of Finland. In 1809, Emperor Alexander I of Russia incorporated Vyborg into the newly created Grand Duchy of Finland, which existed between 1809 and 1917 as an autonomous part of the Russian Empire. For Russia, Vyborg was never a major industrial center and lacked large production facilities, but due to its location, it served as a focal point of transportation of all industries and resources, which is still most definitely true today. Vyborg was both the second largest town in Finland, with 49,000 inhabitants, with one of the most diverse ethnic compositions, with Finns, Russians, Germans, Jews, and Islamic Tatars. At the start of the 20th century, turmoil was brewing in Russia as its cities crackled with discontent and revolutionary zeal. And with the start of the Great War, Russia shattered into pieces as many of its autonomous republics vied for independence. And the Bolsheviks killed the last emperor of Russia in their play for the Soviet power. And the White Army came together to oppose them in an attempt to hold together Imperial Russia. And civil war ravaged the whole country. And in its very west, the Finnish saw an opportunity to break away from this chaos. And so, following the Russian Revolution of 1917, Finland took the chance to declare its independence. Initially, Vyborg was in the hands of the Finnish Red Guards, but was soon captured by the White Guard during the Battle of Vyborg on April 29, 1918. This led to the Vyborg massacre. It was the killing of approximately 360 to 420 Russians, as the White Army cleansed the city from the Reds. After the Civil War, the parliament controlled by the Whites voted to establish a constitutional monarchy to be called the Kingdom of Finland, with a German prince as king. However, Germany's defeat in November 1918 made this plan impossible, and Finland instead became a republic with a president elected in 1919. Despite a bitter civil war and repeated threats from fascist movements, Finland became and remained a capitalist democracy under the rule of law. Under Finnish rule, Vyborg reached the size of roughly 80,000 inhabitants, and large minorities of Swedes, Germans, Russians, Romani, Tatars, and Jews remained, keeping the international flavor intact. Vyborg, now known as Viipuri in Finnish, was built up, and many great landmarks were created during the interwar period. But soon the world was on the brink of chaos once more. 3 months after Hitler invaded Europe, Stalin began the Winter War between the Soviet Union and Finland on the 30th of November 1939. Despite superior military strength, especially in tanks and aircraft, the Soviet Union suffered severe losses and initially made little headway into the difficult Finnish terrain. The Soviets had made several demands, including that Finland release substantial territories in exchange for land elsewhere, the protection of Leningrad being the primary cited Russian concern. When Finland refused, the USSR invaded, leading to over 70,000 people being evacuated from Vyborg to other parts of Finland. The Winter War was concluded by the Moscow Peace Treaty, in which Finland ceded 9% of its territory to the Soviet Union, including Vyborg. But the Soviet losses had been heavy, and the country's international reputation had suffered. As Vyborg was still held by the Finns, the remaining Finnish population, some 10,000 people, had to be evacuated in haste before the handover. Thus, practically the whole population of Finnish Vyborg was resettled elsewhere in Finland. These Finnish evacuees came to be an influential political force, and their wish to return to their homes was an important motive when Finland sought support from Nazi Germany against the Soviet Union. As a result, Finland and Nazi Germany fought on the same side in the Second World War. On August 29, 1941, Vyborg was captured by Finnish troops. The first civilians started to arrive back home at the end of September, and by the end of the year, Vyborg had a population of about 9,700. In December 1941, the government of Finland formally annexed the town along with the other areas lost in the Moscow Peace Treaty. However, this annexation was not recognized by any foreign state, not even Finland's ally Germany. By 1942, the population reached 16,000. About 70% of the evacuees from Finnish Karelia returned after the reconquest to rebuild their looted homes, but were again evacuated after the Red Army's counter-offensive, which was timed to coincide with the Battle of Normandy on the Western Front. By the time of the Soviet offensive, the town had a population of some 28,000 Finns, and was again taken on the 20th of June 1944. Nearby, the Finns managed to halt the Soviet offensive at the Battle of Tali-Ihantala, which was the largest battle fought by any of the Nordic countries in history. There, the Finnish forces achieved a defensive victory against overwhelming odds and managed to delay the advancing Soviets. Vyborg, however, was seriously damaged, and during the 1947 Paris treaties, Finland was essentially restored to its borders of January 1st, 1941. So essentially the borders established after the Winter War with the Soviet Union. In Finland, the Paris Peace Treaty and the dictated border adjustments were perceived as a major injustice and a betrayal by the Western powers, especially after the sympathy Finland had received from the West during the Soviet-initiated Winter War. However, this sympathy had been eroded by Finland's collaboration with Nazi Germany between 1941 and 1944. During the war years, Finland not only recaptured territory it had lost in 1940, but continued its offensive deeper into Soviet lands, occupying a broad strip of Soviet territory. This prompted the United Kingdom to declare war on Finland in December 1941, further weakening its political support in the West. During the Soviet era, Vyborg was settled by people from all over the Soviet Union. The Nord Stream offshore pipeline project started in 1997 and runs from Vyborg compressor station along the bottom of the Baltic Sea to Greifswald in Germany, and is one of the most important economical links tying Europe and Russia together, especially now that Europe is in a struggle converting to green energy and has come under pressure following the pandemic. It started operating in September 2011. The feeding pipeline in Russia is operated by Gazprom and is a part of the integrated gas transport network of Russia. The Finnish would say that before the war, Vyborg was a major Finnish town of culture. Indeed, it had been the second largest city in the country at one point, and had it remained under Finnish control, it may still be today. But while rightfully Finland may deserve the town, it's been Russian for far too long, and there are few who even bother to question, what if? What if it was still Finnish? What if it was still called Viipuri? It is an unfortunate truth that large parts of Vyborg and its old town were not maintained by the Soviet government, or the new one either. This is especially sad since it has a sense of Scandinavian culture, unlike anywhere else in Russia. At one point, the town was on the verge of oblivion, as dozens of abandoned historical buildings crumbled from neglect and a lack of funds for restoration. Many held it as an example of failure of Russia's preservation policy. Now, however, Vyborg is finally being brought back to life thanks to a $26.5 million government-led restoration project supported by the BRICS-established New Development Bank, and the recent changes are evident. Vyborg is a fascinating historical time capsule blending Nordic beauty with Soviet practicality. This is my Patreon now. Become a supporter to be added, and I would like to thank my long-time sponsors. Now guess where this footage was taken? And I'll see you soon. Cheer Perspective, out.